So I'll say let's get started. Quebec's labor market and economic conditions have become a challenging landscape for employers and employees over the past few years, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. When it comes to English speakers in Quebec, navigating the labor market as a linguistic minority comes with its own unique challenges. In 2021, PERT conducted a survey on the employment issues and needs facing Quebec's English speakers. Needless to say, there are several challenges that are facing our communities, including access to employment services, unemployment, and French language barriers. We are pleased to be bringing together experts from organizations who are working to improve the employability and address the employment issues facing English-speaking Quebecers, who will be sharing their perspectives from the field. We hope that this conversation can highlight some of these issues and the solutions that are needed. So to start off our conference, I'll be introducing our wonderful panelists. So first, down to my right here, I can see Kassandra. So Kassandra Kernisan is the Executive Director of the DESTA Black Youth Network. We also have Trina Bélanger, who is a Coordinator and Employment Counselor at the Centre de Recherche d'Emploi de Pointe-Claire. And then we also have Alan Richards. On our screen, you might see CASA Richards, but his name is Alan Richards, who is the Executive Director of the Committee for Anglophone Social Action, also known as CASA. I would like each panelist to take about 3 minutes to introduce themselves and also share with us what are some of the largest barriers to employment that you have seen in your work with English speakers in Quebec. So I'll start with you, Alan. I'll give you about 3 minutes to respond. And just a reminder, I'll be using the hand raise reaction when you have 30 seconds left.
Thank you very much. So first of all, thank you to PERT for the invitation to come and share the perspective of CASA and Gaspésians. So Alan Richards, I live in the Baie des Chaleurs area of the Gaspé. I'm a born and raised Gaspésian, and like many of my fellow Gaspésians, I've lived outside of the region and actually lived and worked across Canada for some 10 years until I finally decided to come home in 1999. Since my return, I've been working in the community sector and mostly relating to employability and economic development. So I've only been executive director of CASA since September 2021, so a little over a year. And while I'm relatively new to the position, I do have many years of experience with the community, especially the English-speaking community of the Gaspé. So CASA is a multi-sectorial organization. We work with the English-speaking community. We have been doing so since 1975. We offer programs and services for English-speaking Gaspésians of all ages, ranging from health and social service access to employment, recruitment and retention, arts, culture, heritage, tourism. We're a small community, and there's a lack of specialized organizations that offer services in English. So that means CASA has had to step into many of these sectors to help address the gaps in services and resources. So we offer employment services under contract with some local CJEs and other employability organizations due to their lack of capacity of their teams to serve English speakers. We run PPE, so Préparation pour l'Emploi programs that work with those who are farthest from the labor market, and we provide direct referrals for education and training, CV writing, job searches for those who are ready. So having said that, the barriers we recognize for English speakers in the Gaspé to integrate the labor market, they're varied across the region and across age groups. Depending on the client, they could have needs related to simple job search or CV writing, to poverty, substance abuse, skills gaps, and some of our residents are simply not even participating in the system. Many don't have basic documentation like birth certificates or SIN numbers. So we see a very special situation when you realize that as I sit here today, there are 1,660 vacant jobs in the Gaspé right now. And we have sections of our population that are experiencing close to 30% unemployment. So a dilemma there. There's very large portions of those who are working in our region, especially in the English-speaking community, but the broader community as well that hold seasonal jobs, fishing, agriculture, and forestry. And unfortunately, many are not looking for year-round employment. They've been doing this for a while, and this is how they want to do it. So I see the hand. I look forward to the conversation. I appreciate the invite, and I'll share my 2 cents later.
Great, thank you, Alan. I'll now ask you, Kassandra.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. So yes, I am the Executive Director at DESTA Black Community Network. And we work specifically with the Black English-speaking community in Montreal. So this is a double minority group that faces additional barriers to employment that I think, I don't want to say are obvious, but I think not having the language or having to overcome language barriers, as well as the systemic racism that's embedded in the system that we live in, makes it very difficult for the community to be able to advance when we talk about employability. So our organization really works from the perspective of helping the community, members of the community, to overcome these barriers, providing opportunities, but also working, working with companies, working to spread awareness with regards to discrimination, racism, and just being more inclusive in a lot of these spaces to really encourage diversity, to really reflect what Quebec is, which is a very diverse society. So I look forward as well to the conversation. Again, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Kassandra. And lastly, we have Trina Bélanger.
Hi, so my name is Trina Bélanger. I am the coordinator and employment counselor at the Centre de Recherche d'Emploi in Pointe-Claire. I'd like to take the opportunity to say thank you to PERT for inviting me here today. I'm really looking forward to having this discussion. As for a little bit of my background, so from my biography, you can see I'm a military spouse. I have had the opportunity really to travel throughout the world, looking at many different aspects of not only employability, but also in the educational system as well. My background originally was in teaching, so I have taught for a number of years and transferred over into the into the employment field. When I lived in Ontario, I had that opportunity and really fell in love with the actual sector itself and finding ways to kind of connect with different people from different organizations. Right now, my position is in the West Island of Montreal. We receive a lot of different immigrants within the area. A lot of those immigrants are coming with different baggage, different barriers, different needs, and a lot of times it is the language that is being kind of spoken the most as being a barrier. A lot of times they're coming here speaking English only as their second language, speaking their language of origins, certainly as their native tongue, and then trying to learn how to speak a third language sometimes is quite difficult as well. Where clients are anywhere from age 16 and above, so we have been able to adapt and change our program to help really specifically focus on these barriers that they have. Language is just not the only one. Certainly we have a job to do with providing maybe access to these services, making them aware of what is available to them as an English-speaking Quebecer in the area. Not only that, but just showing them and helping them and guiding them to their rights as a Quebec in the Quebec community for employment. So that's one of the things that we've been kind of working on, allowing them to see what kinds of rights that they do have, and certainly the difficulty in getting training within the area. I know we have a lot of opportunities within French, but we do have some in English, and sometimes it's just not equal, or it's exactly what they're looking for in order to help them to obtain employment.
Great, thank you, Trina. Just going to put the hand down there. So thank you to our panelists for introducing themselves. So I have some questions that I've prepared for each of you. So I'll just go back in the order that I asked you each to speak. I'll start with you, Alan. So Alan, just based on your experience, how can we best promote the inclusion and the integration of English-speaking Quebecers in today's labor market? And you could speak to your experiences in Gaspésie, but also more broadly across the province.
Yeah, I think so. While my answers are based in the work that we're doing here in Legaspi, I think a lot of them are probably very transferable to elsewhere in the province. And actually, it's interesting, Trina. Trina was just talking about understanding about what's out there in terms of services and resources is a major barrier for our community in the Gaspé for employment services, but for, I would say, most of the government offered services, just a real lack of awareness about what's out there and a misperception about who those services are for. And so oftentimes we find that people of the English-speaking community aren't necessarily seeing themselves as being the clients of the Services Québec, the Carrefour Jeunesses, and the Service de l'Emploi, mostly because the information that's coming out is predominantly in French, and the advertising, the promotion, they're usually through venues such as French newspapers, French radio stations, French social media. So not even in the regular streams of communications that English speakers tend to use. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing at CASA has been about, yes, building the awareness of our community about what's out there, but really working with the partners so that they can understand the differences in how they approach the broader French-speaking community and the English-speaking community. It's been a real work in progress in terms of getting, first of all, the leaders, the management of these organizations to understand that there's a difference beyond language. You can't just translate a flyer and say you've done your job and you're serving English speakers. And then when we finally did get there and they got it, now they're coming towards us and saying, hey, yeah, we realize that at Service Quebec, for instance, they've reached out to us and said that while English speakers are about 10% of the population, we're overrepresented in their clientele for social assistance and employment programs. And so they're really struggling, even though they have staff who can speak some English, to cross the cultural barrier in terms of how they interact with those individuals, how they reach them, and ultimately how they get them the support that they need. Because like I mentioned earlier, a lot of the clients that are coming to them have a whole host of needs above and beyond just job search and CVs. They might need they might need to see other professionals for other things that are going on. And we're running a NEEF program right now, a NEEF project, so the Ni en Emploi, Ni en Éducation ou Formation, with our partners, all of our employability partners, to look at what services do they offer. But also we're doing some outreach to people who aren't currently accessing our services, young people who aren't currently accessing our services, to ask them why not and what their needs are, so that we can, one, identify where some of the gaps are, but two, work with our partners so that we can have a way that we can collect information and share information quickly so that we can refer these clients to the best place. If it's training, if it's health and social services, if it's job writing, if it's, whatever the service that they need, that we'll be able to turn quicker, know where they should go, so that instead of the client having to navigate the system can guide the client to the appropriate services. And so awareness has been a huge piece of what I think our role is. And when you ask the question, what is your role? I realize there are many different organizations around this table right now on this call with many different mandates and approaches. So my answer, I think, is more specific towards CASA, but I believe that there is a broader role there for the English-speaking community and the organizations that support it to work with our partners across the province on these issues.
Okay. Kassandra, Trina, is there anything you'd want to add to that? Just the idea of promoting, the inclusion and the integration of English speakers. I'll start with you, Kassandra.
Well, speaking from the work that we're doing at DESTA, I think, where it becomes very challenging is that we are, we're not the only organization in Montreal doing this work specifically for the Black English-speaking community, but these organizations tend to be underfunded, and we tend to work in our silos versus really coming together and bringing our resources together to make an impact. And I think, we really need to start looking or approaching the problem from that perspective. because, there are resources, there are programs that are there to support communities that are struggling. But I think, when you look at organizations, a lot of these organizations have capacity issues, have funding issues. So I think, that's a big challenge to overcome with regards to this work.
Trina, anything to add to that?
Yeah, for sure. I like the fact that Kassandra, you brought up the funding issue, because I think all of us are always looking for more funding so we can do more with what we have. Being a very small team in Pointe-Claire, there's 5 of us that work out of our office. It can be very challenging in that aspect, but I think the idea of just being able to provide the opportunities and just to show them what the opportunities are within our area. Like I said, we're in the West Island. Sometimes they don't know where to look. So it gives us that opportunity to be able to share those opportunities, but we need somebody who's there doing that as well. So we can't just have an employment counselor doing one specific thing. We need somebody who's researching and kind of making those connections and being able to provide the support on both sides of things. Our mandate is with Service Quebec for our services. And, really once they find employment, that's kind of technically the end of the road for us. And we hand them off to the employer. But I think more needs to be done, with being able to provide the support on both sides of things to make sure if there are issues when they're in their job, that we're able to provide them with solutions, or just sometimes to mediate, just sometimes to express what's really going on. Sometimes as an English speaker, they're not comfortable with doing that with a new employer because they're afraid that they're going to lose their job. So just maybe having those extra resources that are out there to help provide the support, for the English-speaking community would be very beneficial.
So one of the things that I think you've all mentioned is just the important role of employers, right? So I have this question for you first, Kassandra, and Alan and Trina, you can respond. But what really is the role of employers in bridging the unemployment gap between French speakers and English speakers in Quebec, but also just more broadly, right? Addressing some of these issues, and maybe you can speak to your experience working with employers as well.
Yes, definitely. I think employers have a big role to play. I think that, there's an awareness that needs to be definitely encouraged among employers, because not everyone sees these issues or sees these issues as important or prioritizes these issues. But in our work with employers, we really make it a point to educate where education is required in terms of just the value of diversity. And, just to be completely transparent, at DESTA, we do work to overcome language barriers, but, on top of that, or a priority for us is really overcoming the systemic racial barriers that our community faces. So we really work with diversity and inclusion programs. We have a consultant that we work with that we send into these companies, and we usually do not partner with an organization unless they've done the work when it comes to diversity and inclusion, because what we found is that sometimes we'll place our participants in a job which looks great on paper, but then, the trauma that they live in these spaces it does them more harm than good, right? And then they come out worse than they went in. So, there's a lot of education that needs to be done when we're talking about spaces that are majority white, that may not be so friendly to diversity. So we do, we're starting to do a lot more work with that, and we're starting to really raise the awareness. And I'm finding that within the companies, the corporate landscape, the awareness is increasing rapidly. Like it's a time of great change. It's a time where we have companies coming to us saying, you know, we want to diversify our employees. We see the value. Help us to do this, right? So that's very encouraging, and you know, we really like to work from that perspective.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Kassandra, especially the importance of that intersectional approach, right? That there's language, but there's other aspects of, you know, people's identity. They're not just, you know, an English speaker. They can be a woman. They can be racialized. You know, they can be an interprovincial migrant, a newcomer. So I think, you know, employers need to become more conscious of this, but also just understand that language is also just, you know, an obvious barrier that they could easily tackle in addition to these issues. So I'll give you a chance to respond. Alan or Trina, if there's anything you want to add, just more broadly to that question of the role of employers. So you could speak to some of the work that you've done with employers in addressing unemployment, or if maybe you want to just more broadly question that idea of, you know, where should employers really be in that discussion around employment. I'll start with you, Alan.
Sure. Great answer, Kassandra. I think it leads quite well. I guess I just have an anecdote I think that I could say about some work that we've been doing with a local employer, but it really highlights the change in the mindset that employers are going to have to go through as they struggle to find positions, but also as they look to diversify their workforce. So a local fish plant here had been searching for employees. They couldn't fill about 40 of their positions right before the crab season was supposed to start in the spring. And one of the foremen there, who is incidentally a friend, was asking, said, you know, we don't have English speakers that work for us. We kind of, and I was saying, well, that's really interesting. I said, why do you think that is? And they said, well, you know, we don't really think that the English community like this type of work. And I said, well, it's a pretty broad statement. Have you ever, you know, figured out why that is? And so as we kept speaking about it, CASA, the role for CASA, building awareness again, came up in that we organized with them visits of our PPE students to their plant, and basically found out there was a lot of misunderstanding about what the job was, what it required from the workers. People thought that they had to show up with, you know, a bunch of expensive equipment. Other people thought they had needed specialized training in different machines and whatnot. And after they did the initial kind of visits and question Q&As, it was interesting to see how through the social networks of the PPE students, other people started coming out of the woodwork, because now the message was out there that this was a job that was accessible for English speakers. And the employers now run these kind of activities on their own, and they've understood that they need to do things differently as well in order to attract these workers. They can't just throw up bilingual job postings as they've always done in the French newspaper and expect to have a flood of applicants. And so I think the role of employers going forward, it becomes so much more important because of the competitiveness of the labor market right now, or I should say the lack of competitiveness. And so they need to make sure that they're changing their approaches or adapting their approaches so that they can reach out. And to go back to promoting the opportunity of these workers to these employers, I think that mindset change is starting to happen, and I think we'll see it more and more as people are finding it hard to fill spaces in their workforce. But definitely it's something that's come up more and more, that the awareness is starting to grow, and we're at the cusp of something really important, I think. But
Thanks for sharing that, Alan. I mean, I think from that antidote, like what's interesting, right, is that employment can be intimidating, right? So I think that opportunity to really, you know, for employers to open up, right, and beyond just the job interview or the job posting, to allow employees to, you know, meet them face to face, or to see the site, or to get a better understanding of the role, and maybe, you know, in some ways assess their French language skills. I'm sure you could elaborate on your example that, you know, some people probably thought that the language barrier would prevent them from doing this work, and they learned that actually this was something they could participate in. So that's a really interesting example. Trina, is there anything you'd want to add around the role of employers?
Yeah, I agree. I really like how Kassandra had answered the question. You know, I think you brought up a lot of strong points. with regards to, you know, the Black community and so forth. Alan as well, I really like the idea. I liked your example of bringing the actual students or the group into the work area. I think that's a really interesting approach. Not only does it give the opportunity for the students to see what's going on, but it also gives an opportunity for the employers to meet some of these candidates that could be potentially working for them. It's quite an interesting, I guess, twist to kind of solve the actual problem. I know as well, like I said, we deal a lot with new immigrants within the area, and a lot of times we see a lot of programs for or starting to see a lot of change for new immigrants being welcomed into the workforce, you know, and the inclusion with that there. And I think there's a lot that we can learn for English speakers as well from what's being done. I think there's some things that we can take with regards to the integration of a new immigrant into the working community that, you know, maybe we can apply for just for the English speaking as well. You see a lot of things as well, and I'm going back to immigrants again because it seems it's a big area of clientele for us, that they are getting support to integrate within an Anglophone community, but now we actually need to integrate them into the French community as well to be able to go speak with the employers. So, you know, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding, like Alan said, within the aspect of employers, and as well the aspect of some of the job searchers that we have within all of our organizations. So I think just bringing those things to light, I think is quite an interesting aspect as well.
Great, thank you, Trina. And next question I have is actually for you. So this is just wanting to dig a little bit deeper into the realm of employment services. I think some people are haven't always, you know, had the experience of working with an employment counselor, and they're not sure about, you know, what that world looks like. But if you can just tell us a little bit more about the employment services that your organization offers, but also what are some of the barriers that you've witnessed in terms of the clients that are coming into you, and have those barriers changed over time? Is there, you know, anything new that you're seeing in your field?
For sure. You know, my story is very similar to a lot of, well, to some of my clients that I have. I am an English speaker. I followed my husband to 5 different cities throughout Quebec, not speaking English when I first, not speaking French, sorry, when I first got here. So I get some of the barriers that are there, and obviously the most, I think, apparent to that is the language barrier, because a lot of times you may be able to understand, because it's usually the first thing that we learn as an English speaker, is that we can listen and understand, but being able to respond then takes more time. So I think, you know, like I said, the barrier is the language, but oftentimes too, when you do actually work, and I'm working in a very French situation where any reports I have to write are written in French as well. So we're looking at areas of not only oral language, but the written language as well. So when people are looking for employment and they have to write a report, and it's going to, you know, higher above, whether it's going to government services, looking for funding, whatever it is, it's all being written in French. So those are some of the issues that we're seeing with a lot of our clients, is learning how to do those pieces to be able to perform the actual tasks that they need to do to complete their jobs. We also see, I think within our organization, sometimes it's a lack of confidence. As an adult and you're learning a new language, sometimes you're not as comfortable maybe trying to put forth these, not so much the effort, but you don't want to make a mistake because you don't want to say the word incorrectly. So the actual context of what you're trying to say comes out completely different from what you're actually meaning. So sometimes some of the issues aren't just the language, but now we're seeing as well that confidence or that fear of failing or the fear of making a mistake. Whereas, you know, when we're kids, we don't have the same kind of fears. Certainly within the last probably 2-3 years, and I think everybody can attest to that, we're seeing a lot more mental issues coming through our doors. So yes, people are looking for work, but we're also getting a lot of people that have gone through depression, anxiety, you know, the stress of needing to find work just in order to, you know, pay the bills and so forth. So we're not just dealing with employment, you know, like Alan said, we're not just writing a resume now, we're also looking at some of these other issues because they're barriers for them to find jobs within their field. So we're actually having to look at ways of connecting those people, and it goes back into where can we help those people or send them to an organization where they can receive that service in English as well. So, it's kind of a big role. And I think as an employment center in itself, we've learned to develop and change and modify. We're still trying to do better, but I'm sure everybody's kind of going to be in the same boat, is trying to use the resources that we have to come up with the solutions to better offer a service to the English-speaking community that are coming through our doors.
Thank you, Trina. I'll throw it back to you, Alan, just if you want to comment more broadly on some of the barriers that you've seen. So maybe specifically in the context working with CASA and in your region, what are in the realm of employment? What are the barriers that are you seeing?
Yeah, interestingly enough, we probably couldn't be in more different areas, but I have a lot in common with Trina in terms of what we're seeing. For sure, we are seeing people come in with varied needs now, and a lot of things. People aren't okay in some cases, and getting them the help that they need has been a big barrier for them. For CASA, I guess I'm harking on this, but it's really been about working with employers and service providers to get them to know better what the English-speaking community is, who we are, what our needs are, but more importantly, the potential, the opportunity that they provide to them. A little anecdote, we're working with tourism operators right now, and it took us years to help them to understand the opportunity there was associated with having somebody who spoke English in their building. They work in tourism where they're receiving people from all over the world, but for years, CASA has had 90% tourism has been from French speakers. But as we go forward, more and more English speakers are coming to the area. And in fact, CASA is even trying to promote tourism to English speakers. And so working with those employers to help them to understand, if you can serve this new clientele, the potential markets are much larger and a lot closer than a lot of the markets that they're currently serving to. So been a big shift there in terms of getting first people to understand that there's an opportunity associated with having an English speaker, and it's not just going to be difficult for your managers to deal with that person because they have language issues. But secondly, that that this is also something that they have to build within their own organization. And how do you build that capacity, within your own organization? And I come back to what Trina was talking about, is often as English speakers, I'm pretty fluent in French, but there's a lot of people who speak a lot of French but don't consider themselves very good at French. And so when they see a job posting, especially in the tourism industry, for somebody that's bilingual, they say, well, my French is pretty good, but I'm not bilingual and probably wouldn't be able to speak enough French for that job, when in fact the vocabulary is probably very limited and easily learnable. And brings me to my next point, I think, is the challenge of also trying to tailor French second language learning opportunities to the seekers. So it's not feasible for everybody to take 5 months and go to university and learn how to speak French. A lot of people are just struggling to get by. They're working any job that they can. And so, they just don't have the time to do it on their own time. So I think helping employers get to the point where they are going to be offering these things during work hours, tailored to the jobs that are in their organization, I think has been a big hurdle, but we're seeing it happen. We're seeing it start, I should say, with the tourism industry and the gas bay. And so I think that it's been a hurdle. It's also something that's emerging and is very satisfying. But now there's all these other sectors and industries that are left to attack. So yeah, it's been a big thing for us. And again, I come back to it's understanding, it's awareness, it's perception. Often it's insane that it's boiled down to those things, but that's a lot of what we see in terms of challenges.
Thanks, Alan. Kassandra, anything you want to add to that, or in response to some of the other barriers that you're seeing?
Sure. So one of the big ones I find, especially within the Black English-speaking community, is a lack of network and access to networks, which is so important when we're talking about employability. And, you know, from time to time, we as an organization, we get challenged on the fact that, you know, we're serving the Black community, but we're serving primarily Anglophones. You know, people will say, well, there's so many French-speaking Black Montrealers that can benefit from your services, which is very true. I'm not going to deny that, but I think the advantage that having the language has, you know, for minorities, is that they have more of an ability to build a network. There's strength in numbers. There's a little bit more access for them. I'm not going to say that it's still not challenging, but with the English community, it's a very difficult thing. And we have, one of the things that we've seen is that there's also like a resistance, right? That stems from history and politics. There's a resistance to maybe sometimes integrate into the Quebec population. So then you create like these isolated pockets of society, which doesn't serve when you're trying to really, like, you know, tackle this employability question and really give people opportunities and access to opportunities. So I would say networks is a big one. So we've been really working towards, you know, helping people, exposing people to different networks, bringing people together, because it's so important. It's so important to know people, to know the right people, and really have those connections to be able to build that career for yourself. So.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So I'll move on to some general questions. So whoever wants to jump in, feel free to. But one of the things that has stood out to me just in all of your responses is, I think one of you said that people are not okay, right? And that's, I mean, that's very interesting to hear. And I think probably unsurprising for a lot of the people who are hearing this. And you are all in some form working with service delivery, you're working directly with people. So I don't know if anyone wants to maybe elaborate on that in terms of, you know, what is going on? Is it mental health? Are there other impacts that you're seeing in your community? And how are those kind of playing into the problem of employment and employability for English speakers?
I made the statement, so I could start. Yeah, and I guess we're in a privileged position at CASA to be kind of aware of that because of the different clients that we see. You know, we have, you know, we do interventions with the local CIS, with the local CLSCs and social workers. When they're not able to speak English, we'll send people along so that we can be that cultural bridge, if you will. The language is part of it, but it's also kind of the dealing with the people from our community. And more, the employability team, when we're having meetings and talking about how things are going, are just, you know, bringing this up that, you know, once they start to scratch the surface, they're finding there's all these other things that we need to get taken care of before we could even start to think about going for training or starting to look for a job. And in fact, we've had to bolster our health and social services team with some mental health workers. We've put together some well-being trainings and workshops, and we started to create some specific, what we call corridors of service at the CLSC, so that we can help when we identify people who are not in crisis but at risk, to be able to access those services that they need quickly, and not have to try to navigate the system, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, we see it a lot more, and in the youth activities that we do, a lot of mental health. In older people, it's like everywhere. So that's why when I made the broad statement, it was really, it's a theme at our team meetings these days because of the clients that we're meeting on a daily basis.
Your microphone is off.
Thanks, Trina. I was saying, Trina, Kassandra, anything you want to add in terms of what you've seen, maybe in response to the statement, people are not okay? Like, are you seeing those mental health issues? Are you seeing the need for more wraparound supports in addition to providing employability support?
Yeah, I could speak to that. I mean, definitely. I think You know, pre-COVID, it was an issue. And I think with COVID, it just magnified. So I think this is actually an area where, you know, when I spoke about capacity and resources, this is an area where for sure we as an organization were struggling, just because there's so much to answer and we're not finding the resources or the capacity right now. We partner with several other organizations that also serve the Black community. But we're really looking to build on these issues of mental health, physical health, which is very much tied in to that. But yeah, I mean, we're dealing with people who were already isolated, who experienced a whole other level of isolation with COVID. And now coming out of it, it's like we're starting to see the effects and how deep the effects are. And, you know, for sure within our community, it's been, when I say our community, the Black community specifically, it's been historically, you know, a stigmatized topic. The community doesn't like to talk about it. Things are changing, you know, things are getting better because for example, we launched a program, it's a monthly program to bring the community together. We launched it back in May and the response has been huge. Like we sell out, we put the registrations out and then within 2-3 days, it's full. So the community is now becoming more and more receptive and responsive to these things, which also really demonstrates the need. And we're getting so much positive feedback. Although we can't address everything in these sessions, you know, we're bringing the community together. People are talking about it. People are exchanging resources. And that's been a huge thing with regards to, you know, you can't just tackle an employability issue. There are other things that are, you know, underlying that really need to be addressed in order to say we're really addressing the problem or the problems.
Great, thank you, Kassandra. Trina, did you have anything to add?
I agree. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of seeing pretty much the same thing, even in the West Island. When it comes to the clients, certainly mental health is a huge issue. There's probably a very small percentage of clients that are coming through doors that don't have some form of mental health issue that we're needing to address and find resources. So, you know, it's definitely become a big piece to have to find the answers to. And like Kassandra, we're struggling to kind of find, you know, the capacity to be able to do all of this, plus the job that we're being paid to do, plus as well, then you have the other side of the employer. So, you know, you're kind of trying to balance all of that in order to provide the best support possible, because I think we're all pretty passionate about what we do. We're pretty passionate about making sure that we're being able to answer and find solutions for the people that are coming through our doors. You know, a lot of times I like the idea, Alan, that you were talking about bringing in resources to do workshops. You know, that's one thing we have talked about in our team meetings as well, is having somebody come in and discuss how to deal with and talk about and make the conversation a little more smooth with their clients when it comes to talking about mental health, because there is a stigma. It's still there. It's still going to exist. It's going to exist for a while, unfortunately. But just having the ability to open up that barrier and discuss it is at least one step to finding a solution, and then being able to support. I have if you'll permit me, I have a client right now. She was a client of mine last spring. She's a young client, finished studies, still going on with studies, was looking for employment. And I was kind of thinking, you know, okay, well, she's youth. She's just not being as proactive as what she could be. You know, unfortunately, I took that thinking. I have youth at home, so, you know, sometimes I understand sometimes what can happen. And finally, she emailed me and she said, she told me, you know, Trina, I'm really struggling right now. I've actually gone to see a psychiatrist because I'm struggling with a lot of mental health issues right now. And that's why I'm not doing what she was doing. And she's like, can you still help me continue to support send me some things, can we, so it's kind of like, oh my God, you take a step back, but until you have the information, you can't find ways to overcome that. So I've met with her, we've discussed the barriers, we've kind of had that conversation. And as opposed to me kind of giving her the positions and allowing her to apply for the positions and following up the employers, it's a piece that I'm doing with her on our calls. Like when we're on the phone, when we're there, I've taken the action of doing it and with her, not for her, but with her. So she's still feeling like she's part of the thing. So I think there's ways that, as employment counselors and services that are trying to help with employment, there's certainly ways that we can, maybe try and help bridge that gap as well. But again, it's the resources, and we're all stretched, so it's trying to find that balance, I think, for everything.
Great, thanks for sharing that, Trina. I mean, on that topic of just, everyone being stretched, right, and the limited resources, I think you've all said that in some way or another. I don't know if there's anything you want to just elaborate around that issue of funding and what organizations are going through right now, given that it seems like you have higher workloads, but what is kind of the funding landscape for you? I don't know if anyone wants to take that question first.
I can jump in. So, I mean, for us, we are able to get quite a bit of funding for our programs. But when it comes to what we call core funding, or being able to support our operations, for example, for, director level positions, or, outreach and communications, positions that would serve across different programs, and then just the overall infrastructure of the organization, it's very difficult. And it puts us into this constant loop of like this program focus versus like an organization that, where we're here, we have our mission, we're here to serve, and we can build on that. It's really, okay, this program is this, and it puts us into this kind of like narrow-minded way of thinking and operating. So I think that's definitely a challenge, just being able to access core funding for the organization that's sustainable, that will last many years, so that it's not like, you have a program here, then you have to take it away, or you have to pull it back, or, you have to hire staff and then lay off staff. That type of a situation makes providing these services very difficult and not consistent. And that's what's needed. We need consistency. We need, for the community to be able to rely on these organizations. And so I think that's a big, big challenge for not just us, but many organizations. I've heard, I think almost all nonprofit organizations say the same thing. So that's a big one.
Thanks for sharing that, Kassandra. Alan, Trina, anything to add to that?
For sure. I know for us over the past couple of years, for those of you who know me, we actually closed out a center recently, and we've had funding cutbacks over the last couple of years for our services, seeing the unemployment rate being very low. So, you're constantly trying to figure out ways, to find funding to be able to do everything that you want to do, to be able to help all these people that are coming through your doors. And I think it's becoming very creative with the funding that we have, and partnering with other organizations. It's one of the things I think that we talk about in our sectoral table for employment is, how can we support each other? Because we talk about promotion. I don't have a budget to go and promote my organization. I don't have, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to hire somebody on to do all these fancy things. Like a lot of the stuff that we have is in-house, but being able to sustain all of that, sometimes we have great ideas of what we want to do, but being able to maintain it is a whole other thing. So just being able to partner, I think, and have the opportunity to partner with other community organizations and with other organizations like PERT gives us that opportunity to do that and see how we can kind of do that together as a whole, as opposed to everybody trying to do everything all themselves, I think is quite interesting. If anybody has suggestions for funding, I think we'd all be widely available and, eager to learn some new opportunities and so forth. But it certainly is something we think about every year, and it's something that we have to renew every year. That's it, so I know for us, that's kind of a big piece, and we've already started the discussions for what are we going to do next year, so that we are not cut back on our budget, so that we can maintain and continue to grow and develop what we have put in place for this year. So it's definitely, I think, on the forefront of everybody's thinking within the next little while in our negotiations for our contracts coming up in this after Christmas or early spring for the programs for Service Quebec.
Great. Alan, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just I guess to give a bit of our perspective. So we are very fortunate being one of the only games in town for English speakers. We are fortunate to have some what I guess we call core funding, so to support the overhead of administration and whatnot. So we get some money from Canadian Heritage, and now we also have some money coming from the Secretariat that helps us to have satellite offices and increase our capacity. So having said that, we are still very much project-driven organization in that 21 employees, 17 of those are have a finite end to their project, and granted we can renew the projects, and we have over time. It still takes resources to be able to go out and write the proposals and do the follow-up and the reporting and everything that's associated with it. Is kind of the nature. So I agree, Kassandra, most not-for-profits are that's a struggle for us. And I will say too, having worked with many partners who are like a specialized partner that are working with the provincial funding, the funding is based on the client served. So one client served equals so much funding. In this situation that we're in, where it's not just about meeting with a client to do the CV. There's all these other things over here that you have to take care of that's not being compensated through your contract for that employability service. So at CASA, we are fortunate again that we have all these other projects that we can lean on, where we're leaning on our mental health team to help this employability client. And I see so many other organizations like Carrefour Jeunesses and Service d'aide à l'emploi and other employability service providers that just don't have that opportunity because they have what they have. So yeah, I totally see it as a big challenge for many organizations. And like I say, CASA is fortunate, but it's not doesn't come without its pains. And things are good right now. It doesn't say that in 5 years we wouldn't be up in a different situation as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, sorry. I just really wanted to jump on the last thing that Trina said, though, about working in partnership. And that has been, I think, the huge key for our success, or the success that we have had in the gas space, just working with so many other people and other organizations that have similar mandates or adjacent mandates, or mandates that have to do with what we're doing. And you use PERT as the example. So that NEEF project that I talked about earlier, that's a action research project. So there's a big research component to that. We don't have the internal capacity to be able to develop methodologies and surveys and whatnot that would be a solid research piece. And so PERT is able to do that for us. And I think as an English-speaking community, being the size that we are across the province, it only makes sense. There's only wins in it if we can start to lean on each other and use each other in that way. I think that's the key. In the same way that here on the coast, we're partnered with all these different organizations, depending on who they're trying to serve, that we can bring them in when we need them. I think we should be totally doing that across the English-speaking community. It's essential these days.
Yeah, I can't echo enough just the importance of partnerships, right? I think, Kassandra, you said earlier about the issue of working in silos as organizations, right? So there's definitely, I think, a lot more that we can accomplish as organizations when we are at least, staying in touch and figuring out how we can pull resources together. So I want to jump to another question that I had. So this goes back to this employment issues and needs survey that PERT conducted last year. So we surveyed organizations such as yourselves, and in that survey, we got a pretty astounding number. So 46% of organizations in that survey indicated that there was a lack of information and resources on employment and training that was reaching participants. And they said that this lack of information and awareness was actually acting as a barrier for English speakers in the labor market. So I don't know if there's any reactions when you hear that around the issue of awareness and reaching your communities, or maybe you can speak to some innovations that you found to kind of get around that. Feel free, whoever wants to jump in.
So I think for us, kind of looking at the training piece is it's kind of, we have some resources in the area. Do the resources that we have meet the needs of the people that are coming through our doors? Not always. I know one of the pieces that is being discussed more tomorrow is the side of education and so forth. But it certainly is a barrier for a number of people coming in. Like I said earlier, we see a lot of immigrants and they're coming in with their education. They have to get it recognized here in Quebec. And part of it gets recognized, but not all of it. And then they have to go find other training. So, we're spending time helping to research that. Technically, it's not our mandate either to look at the education side of things. So, it's kind of a piece that for us has kind of created not an uncomfortable spot, but it's certainly a spot where our clients are asking us, where can I go to get this kind of training? Because I need it in English. I don't know enough in French. The opportunities in French here are vast. We are in Quebec, so there's quite a few resources when it comes to that. But when it comes to specific training for a lot of English speakers, sometimes the training is there, but it's not exactly what they need. So an example with that would be an employment counselor. If you're an employment counselor here and you go through the French system, you get a very specific certificate diploma at the end of it, where you're specifically trained to do the job that we do. In the English side of things, it's a very different training that's being offered, and it's just a small component to a bigger picture. So you see that there's some inconsistencies with the education system in English and the education system in French. And sometimes you're just trying to find the resources yourself and make those connections as well. We are pretty lucky because Service Quebec is right next door to us. So I know they try and deal with a lot of the education issues as well. So sometimes we use them as one of our resources to kind of say, it's not a client of yours, it's a client that we've recruited. Do you have suggestions maybe to help with that as well, to kind of bridge that piece?
Thanks, Trina. Kassandra, Alan, anything you want to add in terms of reaching your clientele and making sure they know about your organizations and services?
Well, I think Trina mentioned it before. I think, letting people know just that communication and outreach aspect, it costs money, it takes resources. And I think, we recently brought on an outreach and communications person earlier this year, but we were operating without one for quite a while. And so, yeah, people don't know what's out there. People are alone, struggling. They don't know that these services and resources exist. And I think it takes work and it takes resources. And I think oftentimes, when we look at where we have to manage our budget, those are the things that kind of get pushed to the side. But it's so important. And sometimes you really have to go and get, specifically with our community, the community that we're working with at DESTA, sometimes you really have to go out and get them. So it takes a more personalized approach. It takes a lot of effort and work. So I think that piece is definitely key.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that last point, Kassandra, is so important. It's the same. We find ourselves having to knock on doors. I think, the days of we throwing something up on Facebook and assuming that 100% of the people know about it now, it's they're gone. And so, yeah, we've just found ourselves having to do so many different things to try to get that awareness built. So even piggybacking on some of our other programs or activities. So seniors wellness groups, well, we'll have a portion of that dedicated to sharing information. Our youth activities, we make sure that along the way, we're also talking about, our partners at the Anchor Training Center or, other opportunities for those young people. And I think there's also an opportunity for our partners because Service Quebec came up a while ago, and we built a really cool relationship with our Service Quebec centers here, and they're very frank. That in order for them to get information out there, it's incredibly heavy. It's like it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. You got to get things okayed, and they got to be approved up and down lines, and they have to follow certain guidelines. And then if you add English on top of that, well, then people start losing their minds. Whereas the directors say to us, we're under all of these restrictions, but you guys aren't. You guys can talk about us. And so we're like, yeah, heck yeah, we can do that. And so we don't have to follow all the rules, and I can approve the message. And so it helps. It's easier for me, but it helps them to be able to get that message out there. And they appreciate so much that support. But it takes effort, it takes time, and it takes resources to do that. And so, how can we support that long term if there isn't a project that we can apply to be the spokespeople for employability of other employability organizations? So it's a critical piece. It's a barrier that we continue to work on. Kassandra, I just interviewed for a communications person yesterday. So yeah, definitely been missing. Definitely, it's corner of the desk stuff that people have been trying to do, but nobody has been focused on. And I think that it's key. It's key for us.
Great, thank you. So we're going to switch gears a little bit. So in that same survey from 2021, we also surveyed English speakers themselves. So these are English speakers who are in the labor market. And another finding was that 31% of English speakers in that survey indicated that linguistic discrimination or employer bias based on language had contributed to their employment difficulties. So this is their self-perception of how they thought the job hunting process has gone. So in thinking about how sociocultural factors impact employment, how can this be addressed? And do you have any comments around that experience of people maybe feeling like, their level of French wasn't perceived as being good enough?
I'll say 100%. And it's kind of funny to say it this way, but it kind of goes both ways. I have French-speaking clients that don't feel like their English is strong enough, but the majority of our clients are English-speaking, and they're definitely not comfortable speaking French. The linguistic barrier is a huge barrier, and it's not something that's going to go away, overnight. It's going to take some time. It's going to take, I think, promotion. It's going to take a lot of understanding. It's going to take a lot of, give and take, going back and forth. We see clients that, will interview for positions in English, and then they go for their training, and the very first day in training, everything's in French, and then they're looking going, well, I don't understand a word of the training, so I don't know what to do. So a lot of times they'll just leave that job and try and find something else because they're just not able to continue to do that. So, it kind of perplexes me in one sense after doing, a whole interview and knowing that they're just specifically in English, but just, sometimes being able to pull out those pieces where, the French is strong enough. Like I said, it's something I think that's going to be there for a while, and it's something I think we'll need to tackle, not just individually, not as one organization, but as a group as a whole, and finding ways to maybe make those connections with the employers and with between our clients, and kind of being that person in the middle to try and help gap the distance between all of that. But it's going to take time. you know, and certainly solutions that are maybe outside of the box.
Yeah.
Alan or Kassandra?
Yeah, I think, Trina, you mentioned compassion and understanding. I think that's something that, you know, we live in a very unforgiving society, and sometimes, you know, just not understanding that even if someone is making the effort to build their language skills, particularly as an adult, it's very difficult to build the confidence that comes with that. So, you know, myself having gone to school completely in English, I can express myself in French, but I'm not going to express myself as well. And I'm very conscious of that. So I think, you know, there's not this this space for developing and giving, and, you know, it's okay, we understand. And, you know, just having that that type of positive reinforcement, that can go a long way in terms of just, you know, because people will very quickly develop an aversion psychologically to something if they feel they're consistently made to feel inadequate regarding it. So I think that's a huge space where employers can work towards, and just society as a whole, just, you know, understanding that, you know, we come from different cultures, we speak different languages, we're diverse, and making the space for that and valuing that, and really also rewarding the efforts of people who are really trying to, you know, it's not easy to immigrate here. It's not easy to come to a city where, you know, you don't speak the primary language. Those things are not easy, and we don't seem to have compassion for those things. So I think that's important.
Yeah, I guess I could just finish. I wasn't surprised when I saw the quote from the study, and I think, as both of my panelist colleagues here have said, you know, I think part of it is the employer's issue, and part of it is the job seeker's issue. So I'm an English speaker. My wife is French speaking. 90% of our arguments are because of misunderstanding. I'm fluent in French, I thought, and she speaks excellent English, but sometimes there's just little nuances that are missed. And so I could totally see two strangers who are trying to have a job interview where the employer doesn't speak any English, and the applicant might struggle in French, could probably have different perceptions of how that meeting went. It's just interesting, and this whole idea of confidence, I think, is so huge. As CASA, we have 21 employees here. Some of my employees are unilingual English. They've come home, or they just haven't been able to develop their French skills. And when we start to talk about it, you know, I find out that they have some French. They just don't think it's very good, and so they rarely use it. And myself, you know, living in the Gaspé and living mostly in French every day, I've kind of gotten over the fact that I'm, you know, never going to be perfect. I know this. My French is never going to be perfect. In fact, I think I speak a very good French. And then yesterday I did a radio interview, and when I listened to it, I went, "Oh my gosh, why doesn't anybody tell me I make all these mistakes?" And my wife says I'd be constantly correcting you if I did that. So, anyways, all that to say is, I think that the safe space for people to be able to grow. That's one thing I think that CASA provides, and I think other organizations definitely could probably learn from that example in terms of offering a place where people can get better and feel safe enough that they don't feel like they're going to be judged or you know, ostracized because of a lack of ability in French. So.
Can I just say, I love your examples, Alan. I hope you saw the emojis going up the side. I think that's fantastic, because I think, you know, I mentioned it before, it's that stress of making a mistake. Well, we're human beings and we make mistakes. You know, I still make mistakes in English sometimes, and that's my mother tongue. So, you know, I think it's just something, the compassion and all that need to be there. And but I really love your example that just hit home. That was perfect.
Agreed. Yeah, I think it's relatable, right? Just seeing all the reactions that, yeah, we all need comfort and safety, right? And The work that we do at PERT is a lot about, talking about how important work is, right? People spend roughly a third of their lives in the workplace, right? So it has to be a space where people feel like they're welcome, right? And it's okay if you're not meeting these very high expectations that are probably you're setting higher expectations than other people are setting for you. So thank you for sharing that. So just speaking, my last question here is just around that idea of safety, right? So we spoke about the important role of employers, right? And how employers themselves also need to be, compassionate towards the people that they're looking to hire, and understanding that, this person might not have perfect French, right? And they need to work on it, but they can still do this job. But I'd want to hear from you, from your work, working directly with employers. What are some of the barriers that employers themselves are facing, right? And what are some of the issues that you think you could tackle directly by working with employers? If anyone wants to start us off, I'll ask you.
I can start off. I don't mind. I think really Alan's example, I go back to that again, is it just hits everything right on the nose. It's the fact that if you're an English-speaking person and you're trying to communicate in French, what you're thinking in English isn't coming out exactly how it's coming out in French isn't the same thing. So I think just being able to understand what you're thinking and what you're speaking may be two different things. So sometimes it's a miscommunication or a misunderstanding that happens between employers and employees, and even colleagues between French and English. Myself, I'm very English. We have another organization that we partnered with in La Naudière, which is very, very French. And, there I speak all French. Well, I make my mistakes. They start laughing, so I know I've made a mistake. So, but we have a good laugh over it. And then they turn around and they try to speak English because they're trying to work on their English, which to me is just the perfect example of the compassion. So they're trying to promote their English as well, because they know there's more and more people coming from Montreal, coming up into La Naudière, that are English speaking. So being able to communicate back and forth, but just having that opportunity and that comfort. I think that if you do make a mistake, somebody's there to say, by the way, you need to say it this way, you need to say it that way. But I think it's some work that we need to do if you're not in a situation where the environment is as accepting to some of the problems and some of the things. And like I said, it just really goes back into what we think in English and what we're saying in French are probably two very different things. So I don't think it's that you're making a mistake. It's just what you're actually thinking isn't coming out the way it should say, that the way you want it to be. So, just having some understanding that, maybe it's on both sides of the fence, I think would be a big step.
If I could maybe talk about just refer back to the keynote this morning, that notion of that check-in or the commonized, I know there are language tools out there. We did a project a long time ago in Quebec City where we looked at these things, but it'd be really cool if employers were able to assess the level of French that they actually need for their job, and were able to communicate that to the job seeker in a way that they would understand. So that bilingual, this catch-all word that means different things to different people. My next door neighbor thinks he's bilingual and he can barely order supper in English. And I'm almost fluent, but I don't consider myself bilingual some days. So it's weird that we have all of these varying understandings. If there was I love that idea that we could use a common tool, and the employer could say, I'm only looking for this, and then the job seeker could go, well, this is what I got, and then they're like, hey, this is awesome, rather than trying to both develop an understanding of what this level of French requirement is. I don't know, it's just an idea, but it seems like it would be a really cool tool for the employers, but it'd be very empowering for people who are thinking of applying as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that quickly. I think the biggest challenge for employers now is really just, it takes a lot more for employers to be able to retain employees. I think we have, young adults coming up nowadays that are much less I want to say loyal. Like there's not this, I'm gonna, stay for 5 to 10 years in one company and build my career there. So it takes a lot more from the employer side to be able to just attract and retain these employees. And I think it goes beyond just competitive salary and benefits. It's like, really meeting the employees where they're at and working to develop them and, giving them a space where they feel like they're valued. I think that's, that's a big challenge for employers nowadays.
Absolutely. There's some fun comments coming through the chat here. Dana said, thank you so much for discussing the emotional aspect of integrating into a new culture and language. And Susanna says, totally agree, Alan. Our self-assessment of our level of bilingualism is often inaccurate, which is so true, right? And around that issue of confidence. So something that can externally just put the pressure off of employers to just know that, okay, this person can do this job just fine, right? And they'll figure it out and they'll be speaking French in no time. I think that could definitely also ease that process. So we're coming near the end of our conversation here. What I'm going to do is I'm now going to open up the Q&A. So just a reminder, you can submit a question to our panelists in the Q&A box, and I will read these out. And whoever wants to answer between Trina, Alan, and Kassandra, please just go for it. So the first question here is from Miranda, who says, hi, I have noticed that more older women 60 and over, English and French, are looking for work. So have you seen this in your organizations? Like, what is the status of, mature workers? We know for a fact that, the retirement age is changing, and, with the pandemic and the current economic situation, or just, people want to keep working past the age of 60. What have you seen, or do you have any comments around that?
I know myself, as employment counselor, I have a number of not just female, but also male clients that are age 60 and over. The reality is, I think for a lot of our aging population is that they can't live off of just a pension alone. With the cost of living going up, with everything seems to be going up and up and up, but a lot of things aren't increasing with regards to that. So I have a number of clients, and we're recently seeing quite a few clients coming in that are looking for either part-time or, 25, 30 hours, maybe not full-time all the time, trying to find something to be able to just make ends meet. I have a client right now, she was with an organization for 25, 27 years now, that she was there. And during the pandemic, the owner of the actual company decided to close his doors. He was over 75 and still working. So, for her, she's never had to look for a job in her life. The job was presented to her at the time. She's never done a job search in her life. So I think we're seeing more and more youth, and we're also seeing more and more, 60 and over, trying to be able to augment their pensions just to be able to make ends meet. And, I have probably in my caseload now, I can relate to 7 or 8 of them very easily, being age 60 and over in that position, trying to find something just to make ends meet. It's definitely, a problem that we're seeing more and more. So thank you, Miranda, and I say hi. I used to work with Miranda, so.
Oh, great. Next question is from Andre. So he says, also, as is also the case with other issues regarding open-mindedness, employers also need support with onboarding new employees who are English speakers in a French-speaking environment. So can either of you speak to that issue of onboarding and how important that is to just ensure that, people don't self-select themselves out of a new job?
I think maybe I could relate it to our experience with the tourism sector. Part of that whole process of us building the awareness of the opportunity associated with having English speakers in their businesses was also dispelling the myths of some of the challenges that they saw with hiring an English speaker. And so part of that process was to help them to develop the tools and develop the approach that they're going to be able to intake an English speaker, and to help them learn the job, but also be able to improve their French at the same time. So yeah, I agree. There's a learning curve there, and I'm not sure that all businesses, all business owners are equipped, or they have that knowledge right now. But it's definitely a support that's required, and we've seen it in the tourism industry, and I just assume it's probably in a lot more sectors.
Thank you. We have a question here from Zoe, who asked, how about literacy issues? So literacy is, a topic that we don't focus on at PERT, but there are several organizations here in Quebec that focus on that topic. So have any of your organizations, I guess, dealt with some of those issues with your clients?
I can speak to that. I think, literacy is in the broad sense, like when we're talking about financial literacy, even, technological literacy, like people feeling comfortable with using a lot of these tools and just, managing their own finances, their own budget. We've definitely worked from that perspective with older people, but also, more so with young people, because when you start them on the right track for some of these things, it makes a huge difference for them and their families. So we have definitely touched on some of these issues, and I think they're important.
Great, thank you for sharing that. We have another question here where someone's asking about what workplace industry have you seen the most success for English speakers? So I think this person's asking more about where do English speakers tend to go? We know from our research at PERT that the majority of English speakers actually end up working in like retail and tourism. And one of the challenges that we've seen is that often English speakers end up working in the services, but then might face like less access to other types of careers if they want to bridge over to something that might have, maybe a more complex requirement for their French language skills. So I don't know if anyone wants to just speak to that issue of, industries and maybe silos that English speakers end up in.
I could give the Gaspésian perspective. So the obvious one that I mentioned earlier, but traditionally English speakers have been overrepresented in the primary sectors of forestry, fishing, and agriculture. As inflation has hit us and costs are rising, and the salaries have stayed the same, jobs in the service industry, so restaurants, coffee shops, those type of things, are becoming less appealing to the people who normally would have worked there. And now, ironically, they're becoming opportunities for English speakers who are working in the primary sector. So we see more and more English speakers at Tim Hortons, for instance, or entrepreneurs or IGAs, which on its face you kind of go, wow, this is cool that we haven't seen this before. And now all of a sudden there's like the Tim Hortons and Passbiac is something like 80% English speakers now. But then when you take that step back and go, well, is this job really going to help them to make ends meet? And what is their perspectives for the future? There are some questions to be asked. So yeah, I think I agree with the PERT study. I think that we do see a lot of in retail, in tourism in the Gaspé, and a lot of those people have come from primary sectors. So they're happy to be out of the fields and off the boats, but now they're working a high stress job trying to serve double to a guy like me. So.
Great. We have a question from Frank. So Frank asks, what are the specific challenges you see in matching bilingual candidates to employers who need qualified bilingual workers? How are the relationships with employers developed with French-owned or French-led organizations to ensure that bilingual candidates can be matched to those job openings? So I think the assumption there is that these are English speakers who, let's say, have a high proficiency of French, right? And they just need to get through the door, perhaps.
So I'll try and relate to what I see coming from my perspective. you know, we do have a number of clients that are bilingual. But I think, like it was said before, sometimes they don't feel like their French is as strong as what is being required for the actual position. And a lot of that comes back to the written reports and things like that. Sometimes they're able to verbally, you know, express things verbally, but when it comes to writing French, it's you know, it's much more challenging. You know, you've got the masculine, feminine, you've got a lot of things there. So sometimes I think it really is trying to find out exactly what the employer is looking for when it comes to the side of being bilingual and needing that French piece. Is it just for, you know, communicating back and forth orally, or is it the written piece? Or, you know, so I think it really is to have to kind of dig into what the employer really needs themselves was, and then trying to find out, okay, well, my client has this, this, and this. You know, I feel like I'm a perfect example for that. I do the reports for Pointe-Claire with regards to, you know, the rapport trimestriel, the year-end reports and things like that, and they're all in French, but I know my French isn't at the level that it needs to be when it comes to writing. So I have created support within my organization to help me out with the writing piece. So sometimes it really is just that piece of, is there somebody that can actually help with the actual written piece, or just with refining the written piece once it's done, just to be able to kind of maybe bridge that little piece that might be of difficulty for the actual client itself, or vice versa. So I also have other employers that have a client right now, and actually the fact that she is English speaking for them, because we are in the West Island, we have a very strong English speaking community. That's actually the bonus for her. Because her written English is very strong. So we are starting to see some change within our community, but I know maybe in Alan's community, it might be completely different. It being very French and Gaspésie, sometimes it can be, you know, just those little pieces that can cause either the client or can cause the employer maybe to not think that they're actually capable of doing that. So.
Could I just raise, I know that we're running up on time, but I just wanted to raise, this is something that's been a challenge for us. And I think we're trying hard to work with employers like the CIS and like a lot of other government institutions. So at the same time here in the Gaspé, we have a lot of trouble recruiting bilingual, so English speaking professionals, social workers, etc. We have people in the community that have their degrees, that are qualified and have job experience, but they can't pass the French exam that they need to get the order to get into the job. And so is there a way that you know, we're trying to work with the CIS and other those types of employers to say, look, these people are predominantly needed to serve the English speaking community, and we know they can do that because they speak English. So is there a way that we can figure out this requirement for the language test, maybe in a temporary way, or get some you know, training ongoing so that eventually they can pass it, but just to fill the need for these workers, but also help to fill the need for the community that aren't getting the services that they need. So I'm pretty sure there's some people on this on the line here from the province of Quebec. So talking to you, Mr. Flock.
Thanks for the shout out, Alan. And actually that's a great segue and a little teaser for tomorrow. So tomorrow there will be a panel discussing professional orders and some of the issues around, you know, English speakers and linguistic minorities being able to pass the OQLF exam or prove their French language proficiency in order to be qualified to practice in Quebec. So you definitely do not want to miss that. But
just
given
say
the
one
time,
thing quick. I don't know if you guys saw in the chat, I think it was Jacqueline. I'm not sure who wrote the comment, but made a comment that McGill actually has a program that will help prepare. So just wanted to kind of make a shout out for that, because I just saw it pop up, and while Alan was talking, I thought, okay, well, there's a good link right there. So.
And I didn't know that, so I'm glad I participated in this panel.
Hi, Jacqueline. Jacqueline is one of the people that works at Dialogue McGill, which is a fantastic program. And yes, they will be offering free OQLF French exam preparation workshops in the future. So if you have trained as a nurse, I don't know, something else, another professional order, check out Dialogue McGill and see how you can pass your exam. So this does bring our panel to a close. I want to thank you, Trina, Kassandra, Alan, for being our panelists today. This has been such an interesting and very insightful conversation. I think you all do amazing work helping English-speaking communities, and we thank you for all the work that you're doing on the ground. This is also the conclusion of our first day of our conference. I hope everyone enjoyed it. I hope you learned something new. I hope you'll be back tomorrow. Today, just for a recap, it started off with this insightful presentation by Donna Lewis from the National Center for Learning Welsh. We did record it, so we'll be following up with everyone to see if we can maybe share some snippets from that conversation, but she shared some really exciting insights into what they're doing with learning Welsh in Wales and some of the things that we could port over to learning French in Quebec. And then we also had our wonderful panelists today, and there's so many things that I learned in this panel, but I think one of the things that stood out to me is just the importance of supporting, these organizations that are doing this work, the importance of funding, adequate resources, but also wraparound supports to ensure that, it's not just about employment, it's also about language, it's about all the other challenges that people are facing and just addressing those issues holistically. So thank you to our panelists for sharing that. And tomorrow will be day 2, our last day. And just as a little teaser, we have 3 events. So we'll be starting off at 9:30 a.m. With our first panel, which will be on French language learning for the workplace. So we'll be talking about how to integrate French language learning directly into on-the-job learning. We'll also be having a panel after that on Quebec's professional orders, which should be quite interesting. And then lastly, we'll have a panel on the education system and those relationships between education and employment for English speakers. So yes, we hope to see you tomorrow, and have a good day, everyone, and thanks for joining us.